Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. If you guys do like and enjoy the content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Today we're going to be talking about a very controversial topic. It'll be the unified rule set or just rule sets in general. And we have Dakpo as a guest. Welcome. So also, if you guys want to support us even more, you guys can subscribe to our Discord where you can ask us questions and we'll answer them on the podcast directly. So yeah, this unified rule set that was created by Lumi Ranks, or the individuals that make Lumi Ranks. They kind of got all the TOs and players together to come up with this rule set. So it was a long process. And we have Dakpo here. If you could go ahead and just explain the NA unified rule list or rule set, and then we can go into how the process went down.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the unified rule set that is being presented, it's an 8-stage list. Our starters are Battlefield, Final Destination, Town and City, Small Battlefield, and Hollow Bastion. And then we've got counterpicks of Pokemon Stadium 2, Smashville, Kalos. In terms of the other rules, we have a 7-minute timer. Your striking is still 1-2-1. It's 2 bands, and it's got modified DSR, which means you can't go back to the last stage you went on. And then it is character first before every game.
All right, perfect. Sounds perfect. Well, I mean, I definitely... One thing that I know that a lot of players wanted is character first, right? So I'm glad we got that. I think the timer is pretty set in stone at this point. I don't think we're ever going to change the timer. We're so deep into the meta, right? I've had my qualms about the timer, but you know, we're so used to it. I don't really expect to change. So I guess the first thing we can go over is just the general
Can I
process.
jump in real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Can I jump in real quick? Because I think there's a bit of confusion about who actually created the rule set. So it's presented by LumiRank, but they weren't entirely involved, right? The full credit goes to, I'm scrolling to the tweet right quick. So it was Ray, the Genesis Ultimate lead, Ray, the guy from 26 Rising, Dakpo, you, and Captain L. Is that like the full team? Like, is that the team that takes credit for the project, or is LumiRank involved in any other way?
I would say the things that LumiRank helped me with specifically was curating a list of which TOs are involved into the vote and all of that stuff, and then posting it. But that's about as far as anybody on the LumiRank staff gave to the project, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and so it's not a list made by LumiRank, it's a list just presented by them, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make that clear since Charles introduced it as a list from the guys at LumiRank, but really they're just involved in the presentation. And so Charles, please continue.
Yeah, good. I mean, good correction there, Ramses. So the big thing that LumiRank did, because I was there for the beginning of the process, but I just got really, really busy, and I wanted to be a part of this, but I just a lot of life stuff. But I think what LumiRank did that helped a lot was gathering. It was kind of like right in the beginning when we all started it. It was like, okay, who TOs X like A ranked or higher tournaments throughout the U.S. And LumiRank had all that information and could gather as much of those TOs as possible, along with players on the LumiRank. It kind of gives like a baseline for the team to start with, and then, you know, Ray, Dakpo, and the others kind of took that initiative and took that group of people, since everyone was gathered, and then started the planning process, which took a very, very long time. Obviously, there's a lot of panelists, so aligning that many adult schedule is really, really difficult. So shout outs to the team, man. I mean, amazing stuff. That takes a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you encapsulated a point that I'll probably go over a little bit more later about how difficult it is to gather so many community figureheads. Because, I mean, everybody, obviously the TOs, they're busy making their own tournaments awesome. It's hard to devote time to other things. So glad you pointed that out.
Different time zones as well. Very difficult. So yeah, Dakpo, if you could go ahead and just go over the process from start to finish. I guess we kind of went over the beginning part of the process where LumiRank gathered everyone together, and then from there, how did this rule set come to be?
Yeah, and this is going to be really interesting because maybe you and Tony can give me more insight to stuff that happens before I even got involved. I know that this was probably something that we've tried to do before, and maybe it just didn't work out, or whatever the case may be. But I'll speak on to when I came on and started getting the wheels moving, as to say. So I think it was around like October 2023 of the last year, around like 8 months ago. Basically, looked at the discussion that was happening for the North American rule set. It was kind of just fizzing out. I know Ryan was trying to get some organization going for it, and I was kind of just waiting for him to see, like, okay, when's the next meeting going to be? Where are we going along with this? But he's getting ready for his tournament, getting busy. Everybody's busy, so conversation pretty much just stops dead in the water. So I started working with him, trying to get the ball rolling, and eventually we started actually collaborating and talking more in that chat about how we would go about making a unified rule set. It's something that's been posed to me on Twitter already, which is interesting, is who should be deciding what our unified rule set is, like who actually has that authority. And a lot of the times I don't think people will understand that the TOs have more stake in the game financially than anybody else does. There could be like an argument of like top players have more stake in it and stuff like that, but like I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot more financial behind the scenes than people realize, and they take that for granted. But so I think before I even came onto the team, it was discussed that we wanted there to be the list of TOs, or the TOs that were curated, just like Charles said earlier in the call, of the major tournaments that happened across North America, and that they would be the final say. So the question is, how do we present rule sets? How do we get information to these TOs so that they can cast their vote or make a decision on what kind of unified rule set we would have? And so that was pretty much where I stepped in. I was like, cool. How are we going to make that happen? One thing that was suggested with the panel was to make a really, really in-depth player survey, which I'm a huge fan of. It was a lot of fun to do. It was a lot of fun to see the results. And that was a lot of credit goes to Captain L for helping set up that survey and set up questions for it. It had like a lot of really cool information. There's some stuff about viewership for TOs and attendance stuff for TOs. Like if a TO wanted to know a little bit more about what are some driving factors for people to travel to the tournament, we had some information there. And then we would move on to more specific information about what kind of rule set that they would like to see. We asked them about specific stage parameters, like, cool, if we're at this length of stage, is this good? And it will like say, hey, this is like how long battlefield or whatever it is. How about this many units long? This is how long this stage is. And we kind of get better than just hearing, I don't like this stage because it's funny. It's, I don't approve of this from a competitive standpoint because of this specific parameter of the stage. So we got really, really detailed in what players are looking for, and what they see fit for viable competitive play. And it's interesting because I'll get into it a little bit later, but we weren't really shocked by a lot of the results. There's a few that were pretty interesting, but a lot of them pretty much mimed what a lot of us were thinking the community would answer. But we did the survey. It got over 1,000. I think it was like, I can't remember the exact number, about 1,500 candidates responding, which is really, really solid. Lumarank also helped there. They posted it out on all their platforms. It was on Twitter. So we got a lot of responses there. We took that data, we analyzed it, we basically formatted information and extracted what the player bases gave us, and I've got that information. I don't mind pulling that up there. Basically the takeaways. But we used that information, and me with the people in the panel and the people in that discussion that were willing to participate and could find the time to jump in. We came together, we took that data, we said, cool, this is the type of rule set people are outlining these, and we're obviously there to make sure that it can actually work because obviously if we go, we want a rule set with DSR, we want 3 bands, and we want 8 stages, like you're going to run out of stages in a best of 5. So you have to have like a conduct, or not a conduct, but just like a panel there to like guide to make sure a rule set actually functions. So we took the data, we came together, we created a suggested rule set, and just to be clear, it's not we created the suggested rule set and then had the TOs okay on it. It was we created a suggested rule set and then we took that rule set and we said, hey TOs, here's all the information from the players. Here's a rule set that we came up with. We want you to vote alongside almost every major established rule set that we have. Vote on these and we'll do a runoff style vote. And so we did that. And the suggested rule set was the one that ended up beating out the other rule sets. So it was interesting. We presented them information, gave them data from the players, had them do their own votes, and then this is the result of the vote. So that's
what were those rule sets that were voted on?
I will say I don't really want to go into like every rule set that was suggested because I really don't want to make divide. I don't think that would be really beneficial. But if you can think of the rule set and it's represented largely in even outside the US, it was probably on that ballot.
Could you tell us how many different rule sets were voted on? Like how many different rule sets were presented to the TOs? Was it like a pool of 3, a pool of 5?
Let me grab it real quick.
And while Dakpo is looking for that information, I just want to say that I don't think this has ever been done in Smash history, not to my knowledge. So, Dakpo said that this started since October 2023. It took a long time, 8 months. So, I think
you mean like a unified rule set in general, or for the US?
For the US.
For the US.
And like the whole, I don't know for the European rule set if like the data collection was there or if it was more like unifying a panel. But
we didn't even have a panel. We just like the Dutch region just made a rule set and people liked it, and so everyone started using it.
Like on this scale of data
different.
collection, you know what I mean? Like I don't think that's ever been done in Smash history, at least for current Smash game, quote unquote, like Brawl onward. I don't think it's ever been done, and I feel like rule set has always been like, oh well, like I know these players, my group of friends or my region likes X, and this region likes Y, and it's never been a bunch of data collected and a voting process with all the TOs that have the largest amount of stake in this. So whether you like the rule set or not, I think the biggest blessing is, if you're a competitor and you're going to compete in NA, you already know that majority of the TOs were down for this suggested rule set. So at least you know what to practice and you know what you're getting yourself into. So I think whether you like the results or not, you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's impossible to make everyone happy. And it should be appreciated that this system happened. And another great thing is if we do have another Smash game, at the very beginning, we could maybe do this again, maybe like 2 or 3 months in, and kind of get this out of the way early on because... And that was another thing that was hard to do this too because we're already 5 years in, so it's like, oh wow, are we really gonna do it now? But at least it got done and the process got done, so we can do this process again at the early stages of the next match game if it comes to, and I think that's amazing.
So I think one of the most common criticisms of the stage list centers down to a few points. The first point I would say is probably going to be that it is very different from what players expect and how players typically behave in bracket. And that this goes down toward the next 2 points, which are specifically PS2 as a counterpick and Final Destination as a starter. Now, my understanding is that the choice for starter stages were based around platform layouts. Is that correct?
Yeah. We wanted unique platform layouts that didn't favor a specific character. So some issues you'll have if you have a starter with like multiple bi-platform layouts or multiple tri-platform layouts or whatever, obviously characters that excel in those types of platform layouts will kind of have a meta created around them, and it's weird like that. And so one of my hopes is to make a completely unique platform layout. Starters, obviously, there's so much nuance that goes into that. There's no way I can say, haha, Mario is just better if there's 2 tri-platforms. Like, there's so much more nuance. There's like platform heights, there's blast zone distances and stuff like that. But from a much more simplified point, yes, we just wanted unique platform layouts as our starters.
Can I ask a question there? Can I jump in? Do you mind, Tony?
Go ahead.
Okay. So you said you want to have multiple layouts because otherwise there's a certain like meta that forms around specific layouts being good. Do you think it's part of the responsibility of a rule set, or in other words, is it part of like your design philosophy to reshape the meta based on your own values?
So I want to flip that question around. I think
Please.
it is, yeah, I think it is the responsibility of creating a rule set as neutral as possible in terms of favoring specific types of stages. So in that sense, yes, it definitely goes to, you could create a rule set that honestly, if PS2 was our only legal stage, like that could work. People would love PS2, but then we'd start to see the characters that specifically perform well on PS2 be brought into a metagame. And that's a rule set type that I would like to avoid.
And okay, so I'm gonna give you my opinion, and I'd like to hear what you think. So my take on generally on rule sets is that we should honestly legalize whatever creates a, in my opinion, simple rule set, right? So one that's easy to parse, as well as essentially legalizing everything that does not deserve to be banned, right? And so if there are certain qualities of a stage that make it not viable for competitive play, whether that's slants or visibility or bugs, what have you, we should get rid of them. And I think it's totally fair to say, well, here are the criteria for stages to be banned. Like, for example, significant similarity if we're thinking about like Dreamland versus Battlefield versus Fountain of Dreams, or even Unova versus PS2, arguably. So I totally get that. And I think if you want to get to a point where you have essentially a stage list that represents the legal stages, in other words, the stages that we can play on. In other words, we're kind of trying to affect the meta as little as possible, right? We should be arriving to a stage list that does not have starters or counterpicks. What do you think about kind of like that process? Because I think if we're saying like, oh, we should avoid certain biplats, well, if the game has like 5 viable biplats, and that's just kind of like the legal stages that the game has, isn't it just indirectly part of the game to say, hey, characters on the stage are good because there are a lot of like viable stages that essentially form biplats?
That's always an interesting question, and there's a lot of aspects of what you just asked me. So I'll try to.
There are, yeah.
Last thing you said, and try to work back. If I miss something, just let me know. So, to your point, there are a ton of biplat stages. There's also a ton of like tri-platform stages in this game too. I mean, it just depends on like how loosely you want to categorize it. If Violet's a tri-plat, but there's Dreamland, there's Midgar, there's normal Battlefield, there's
It
Fountain
could be a platform fighter.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah. So there are a lot, and I think that point that you bring up, especially of finding the threshold of what should be considered for competitive play or not, I think that's incredibly important too. Interestingly enough, there was in the survey we got a lot of that information of what are people's normal like thresholds for what they would consider viable, and that honestly was the most unfortunate part was the triplats, because a lot of the triplat stages besides Battlefield itself fell into this lower threshold of where people were very uncomfortable with the blast zone sizes, or that there's visual issues with Fountain of Dreams concealing actions and stuff like that. So we couldn't put in, or we didn't find a reasonable threshold to put in like a second triplat. But I mean, you're absolutely right about how we have to find that. In terms of, I'm trying to think of what else you said. I think you were talking about if there's just a bunch of a certain layout, we should just kind of rock with it. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think if we're kind of like banning things that are viable, for no other reason other than we don't want too much of the same, that is a very that's a very subjective way of we're kind of like manually balancing the game at that point. You know what I mean? That's like saying, you know what, let's ban like Ryu because Ken and Terry are kind of the same shit. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, we're grassroots. We've had to balance our own game for like 20 years now.
Right.
But yeah, honestly, to be very candid with you, the 8 stages that we were left with were the only ones that passed like a 70% threshold of approval. Like
I see.
I am a fan. Like if I had full creative control and I did whatever I wanted, we would have a 5-stage list. It'd be super conservative. It'd be all unique platform layouts, and we would just rock with that. It's either that or I would want way more stages, because 8 stages is not a lot to work with, and it changes what kind of ban amounts we have, what kind of DSR or no DSR we run. But the end of the day is we didn't have as many viable stages that we wanted, and that's just a product of Smash Ultimate having some really weird stages. It's come so far. Don't get me wrong. Like Melee's operating on like 5.5. If you, I don't know how much you want to consider Pokemon Stadium, but so there was that, and then there was also, I think you were getting at like where we would want to draw the line in terms of having everything be a starter or separating starter versus counterpicks. Were you
right
going towards that? Yeah. So I'm also a fan of having like a full starter list.
Okay.
Just everything. I think it's easier for the players to understand. You'd be like, cool, these are your stages, you know, and it's less rules that you have to write down. Anything that makes the barrier of entry easier, I'm super for. Players were very against that. That was one of the most lopsided questions in the entire poll.
Really?
Yeah, I think the exact percentage I have up here. Yeah, it was 80% of the voters, which was one of the most decided votes, wanted a clear distinction between starters and counterpicks. And a lot of that, I'm assuming, is just American culture. A lot of people just really comfortable with there being starters and counterpicks. But again, if I had full creative control, I don't think it would have ended it like that. But
now, when you say players, how do you define players here?
Anybody who took that survey.
Okay, so respondents.
So yeah, respondents.
As a question, I actually don't know the answer to this. Do we know any statistics about what that population is?
Like region?
Possibly.
Yeah, we have region, which is interesting because like that helped us see like, oh, a DSR, no DSR, and MDSR is like, we can trace you back to, oh yeah, that makes sense. You're from this region. Of course, you're going to vote this way. That was one of the things that I asked Captain L to make sure that we could have in the survey. So we have demographics, but are you looking for like player skill or something like that? Because that wasn't built into the survey. Not that I'm aware of.
Just regional division?
Yeah.
Okay, so it would come down to being roughly just average polling from those regions. Does it sound fair to say?
I would believe so.
Is it average polling, or was there a certain like skill requirement?
There was no skill requirement.
Okay. What do you think? What do you think about that? Do you think like a region should be, do you think like a rule set should be designed to factor in top end competitors more, or maybe even factor in low end competitors more, or should it just be for the average player? I know there's a lot of different opinions on this. I'm curious to hear what you think.
I'm really glad you asked this, because this is something I've been asked as well. And I'll be really candid. That's the whole reason I got involved with this project. I learned that it was pretty much up to the TOs to create this rule set and approve it. And it wasn't happening. And honestly, there's a little bit of concern that there wasn't like a very like experienced player involved. Not saying that any of these TOs aren't experienced players or haven't been in the scene at all, but I definitely do feel like there is an important aspect of having somebody who is actively trying to be the absolute best player that they can be, and have stakes in the game. And that's why I helped out with the project as much as I could, to at least offer some of that is what I can. I've been a person that's been passionate about the rule sets. You can go back on my YouTube. I have DSR discussions. I have early stage list discussions. I'm very aware of all the stats and how they, work in a meta. So I do think that there should be a lot of like top level player influence, and it's like this weird balance because the TOs have the most financial stake in the game, right? They need to make sure that their tournaments actually have people coming in. And then you have your top players who are the ones competing the game, utilizing these resources. And so I think it's definitely needs to be a mixture of TOs, top players, and then I really love how this giant player survey added to our information. I think that it's not right to just completely ignore lower skill levels. Because let's be candid. Like, there's a lot of low level players that don't understand. They look at WarioWare and say, "Ha, funny stage. I want to play on that." Let's be real. There's a lot of top players who have garbage opinions, and they don't know their stuff about stages. They don't care about any of that, and it's not fair to assume that everyone would be well educated in something like that, because sometimes it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think if we did this again for the next Smash game, which, to Charles stealing a lot of my points, I want it to happen. The next Smash game come out, I want us to be really, really proactive with making a unified rule set, so it's not like pulling the world's largest 6-year band-aid off of somebody's arm. I think we should have like a discussion about who is more involved in that process. But sorry, I'm rambling, but it's something that I've thought about a lot.
Yeah, I'd love to talk or just give my points on the general ecosystem as well, because like Dakpo was saying, the most financially involved or invested personnel in the community are the TOs, right? And then I would say the second most financially invested people in the community are pro players, where they're investing into flights, into hotels, into travel, right? To either get ranked or get some kind of following so they could go into streaming or content production or get a sponsor, right? They're essentially trying to make it their career. But on top of that, you also need to have the average player base as well. And it's like, so the TO makes a tournament. Then the top player needs to come to those tournaments, right? So all you already see the link. And then when the top player goes to tournaments, the hope for the TO is, since these top players are going, the average player will go as well, right? And none of this happens without one or the other, right? Because you can have TOs, and you can have TOs and you can have the top players all at the tournament, but if average players don't show up, there's no prize pool, so you need everyone. My big thing is always trying to, the way I view it is, you want to please TOs and you want to please top players just enough, but you also want to cater to the average player. I'm on the side of trying to make things as simple as possible, trying to make things as like the barrier to entry, I want that to be as low as possible, so there is as much players as possible, and then that will make it so there can be more quote unquote top players that can make a career out of this, right? Because right now it's like less than 1% of the player base can be that, but maybe we can get the player base so big, and maybe that percentage will be the same, but that actual number will be bigger, right? So that is kind of how I view it in a macro sense. But it's really hard because there's so many keys and balances, because once you piss off the top player too much, then they don't come. Now it's not, your tournament's not as notable for rankings and stuff like that, right? Once you piss off the TO too much, then they're not even going to make the event. Then we don't got the event anymore, right? And then if you make the barrier to entry too high, then the average players don't show up, then you don't have the numbers there, right, for the pot bonus and for the attendance and for the viewership. And even the viewers I would say the viewers are on the bottom of the totem pole, but they still matter, because these tournaments, these sponsors, all these viewership numbers, that's what they're looking at, right? They're looking at the viewership number, they're looking at the YouTube VODs, they're looking at the Twitch viewership and all that stuff. And as someone who's run a tournament, an invitational tournament, all of these matter for the macro sense of like, okay, so we got these numbers for our first event. how are we going to use this? How are we going to get more sponsors and get more support for the next event? If we get more support, we can get the prize pot bigger, everyone wins, and it all snowballs into the favor. So I always think of it as a macro sense, and I used to be a player, so I understand those perspectives, but I'm not a player anymore, right? So it's kind of trying to balance all of these things and trying to snowball it all in the better of the community. But you can't piss off one party too much. You got to like push it to the point where it's just before the breaking point, so everybody gets as happy as possible, right? And I think hitting that sweet spot is really difficult, and you can go into so many different topics, like the DSR topic, the counterpick topic, and even though having all starter stages makes sense to me, at least in terms of making the barrier entry low, we have a lot of veterans too. You got to think this is not just a community that came out of nowhere and we're 4 or 5 years old. Like there's a lot of players who've been competing in and out of Smash over a decade now and could be stuck in their ways too. So that's also kind of, you're fighting that push as well, right?
Oh yeah, the community is real rough on changes. That's for sure.
Yeah, but it's understandable.
Speaking of events that don't have top players fly out to them as frequently, I think another one of the common criticisms of it is that the Midwest, which already has an established rule set within the sub-region, feels that they're underrepresented very frequently in Smash Matters. Even preceding the rankings discussion, I believe that's a common criticism levied at Luminosity for not qualifying their events because their events are underqualified, and so they've kind of started a bit of a negative point spiral there where they can't get enough points to get their top players to count as points because they don't have points. So, and likewise to that end, one of the things that I believe was a qualifier for TOs to be represented at this table was to specifically run events that had historically had a high number of these points. And so I think from a Midwestern perspective, they view themselves as getting double downed on in what is already a negative spiral for the region, so that they feel like their voice is progressively less heard. What would you say that the ranking did to address players for the Midwest, especially considering they already have this pre-existing infrastructure that we're asking them to set aside?
Who are you asking that to?
Anybody who's interested in answering, but mainly you.
Yeah, I'm not part of Luminosity in any way. I don't have anything to do with their ranking stuff.
I'm in this case, I'm more so addressing the process for establishing the panel for the actual rule set, because I am saying that there is a knock-on effect from the Luminosity ranking that is affecting the unified rule set, and that even though you are not beholden to that Luminosity ranking, this is a knock-on effect of that. And so I'm asking how that particular criticism was addressed by the establishing powers or process of that rule set, the unified rule set.
Gotcha. Well, I'll probably divulge some information that I won't elaborate too much further on, but I want to bring it up just because I know that it is a concern, and you bring it up. The Midwest rule set was also included in our vote, so it was there. I know a lot of Midwest people are probably just like, I think the sentiments I've heard of, we've had the most unified, rule set out of all of North America. How could we throw it away? That option was presented to all the TOs, and I'd be curious to know, or maybe it's like a topic if we go on to the next game when we start making a unified rule set. Maybe we start, I don't know, making votes weighted by like the size of a TO would do that justice, because I know there are Midwest TOs, and hopefully that any type of like misrepresentation is addressed by Luminosity and they get that figured out. But I don't know. It's interesting that you posed the question because I never really thought about exactly what that looks like for a TO to be able to be that cultivated list of 20. I wasn't really a part of that, but I would love to explore different ways we could include TOs onto that. I know that it changes pretty often as we host more and more tournaments in North America, so I imagine that's going to change. Sorry if I didn't answer that exactly what you're looking for, Tony, but it's an interesting question for sure.
Well, you answered it as best as you could, and it's more so a matter of, for our viewers who are listening to this, or some combination thereof, to have that concern addressed within the best ability that we can. And on full disclosure for our listeners is I am actually among the 20 people who was polled for this because I have TO'd multiple majors. And so what I recall from that process is one of the things that we were originally asked, especially if there were multiple TOs for within a subsect, is that they generally tried to limit this by limiting how many people were represented either from a geographical region or from specifically a tournament subset. Like, for example, Cact is obviously going to be the person who would have the most majors under his belt, but at the end of the day, Cact wasn't representing any particular region, if I remember correctly. So
he's representing Europe. Be careful.
He's a sleeper agent.
Exactly. So we got him in the plant.
So my understanding there is that obviously, like, if Cact is there, it would be inappropriate for him to be a representative of the Midwest, despite TOing many majors within the Midwest. So they tried to balance that to as best as they were able to within that confines. But again, this doesn't necessarily address any bias that would be coming from the actual Lumi rank system that would be artificially pushing the Midwest into a minority position. So I'm not going to claim that that is sufficiently addressed, more so just that I do believe there was a conscious decision from their part to attempt to try and balance that out by regional representation, not just population. So, and on that note, I actually was one of the, I think, principal voices speaking up on behalf of the Midwestern rule set as somebody who does typically use the Midwestern rule set at the majors that I run. And I think I personally also, I think what I was most advocating for was, of course, the European unified rule set, because my personal perspective on this was not just to have North American unified, if possible, but to have a globally unified rule set, which is obviously, you don't want to put the cart before the horse here and get too greedy. So I'm trying to remember the exact way I phrased it, but essentially my first pick was to have a European rule set, then with the hopes of being able to maybe entice the Japanese into also adopting a similar rule set once we had North American and Europe on the same page, and then eventually get it to the point that everyone was just running the same rule set. But failing that, I know I personally was an advocate for the Midwestern rule set because I do feel that of the currently existing infrastructure, the most consistently run among majors is the Midwestern rule set. But I don't want to get this twisted. Of the TOs, I think the most consistent sentiment was that rather than being more focused on the actual balance of the rule set, was more a matter of, are other TOs going to adopt this rule set if I run this rule set at my tournament? Because nobody wants to get caught playing musical chairs where they're running the weird rule set at everybody else is not. And so then you're left holding the bag. People are less likely to visit your event when you have Yoshis on your stage list. And so in particular, I remember one of the difficulties we had was how different things like Pacific Northwest in particular are on their unique spices within their stage lists. and how closely their attendees tend to hold it. And so, Dakpo, how do you feel that the stage list was balanced between both how top players view it versus as a compromise among TOs? Like, how do you think these two things affected the balance of the suggested stage list?
Interesting question. And it'll probably cascade into a different type of conversation too. But if I was going to talk about like the balancing between finding like a compromise between the TOs and finding like a compromise between the data, I'll be very candid that since we were going into this process knowing that it wasn't we're going to force this rule set to be the unified rule set or anything like that, it was going to be a vote, it was going to be a decision that was made. We had the ability to create a rule set that was more just data driven and well thought out in terms of, I guess, giving us more space from being hard locked into committal, normal quote unquote stage lists that have already been established. So that bit of freedom was really, really refreshing. It didn't super accommodate to, I really want to make the Cali TOs happy. I really want to make the Florida TOs happy. That wasn't, that bit of bias in our stage selection was not really a factor that we had. We created a rule set based on data and, forethought and guidance from the panel, and we let the TOs decide if that's something that they were comfortable, as you say, like jumping ship and playing musical chairs with. And the rule set that won out was the one that people felt comfortable. And it's an interesting point to talk about, like the hesitation from TOs right now, because that's probably like the biggest question on everybody's mind is like, is anybody going to run this? Like, where is this actually? And it's really cool. We've had a lot of TOs just step up already. Like the Supernova is running it right off the gate. We've got Wave Dash running it. There's the Cirque events that are going to be running it as well. I know Tourney Locator is going to be running it for any of their future events. There's a lot of local TOs that were popping in and out of the chat and just kind of be like, cool, this is it. I'm going to start running it. I'm going to start running it in my local scene, and we're getting feedback from there. We had test results. So it is, and I've talked to some TOs in private, and I won't say which TOs that I'm talking to just for, anonymity's sake, but they're pretty much saying like, honestly, I'm super down to run it. I just want to make sure that people are cool with it. They're waiting until, so what I suspect and what I'll make the call out that I'll see is that give it 2 or 3 months. Supernova will happen. People will be really upset about Pokemon Stadium 2, and then they'll go, well, I guess I'm starting Small Battlefield, and they start Small Battlefield, and then it's not that big of a deal anymore, and then we'll see a lot of TOs go, okay, cool, and then they'll just start running it. That's what I suspect is going to happen. But I do suspect there's a lot of TOs that are going to be hesitant until Supernova happens, just kind of watching how it goes down. So the next 3 months will be really, really interesting to see how it unfolds.
Now,
go ahead, Tony.
To be clear, a common sentiment to this is, I believe the quote is, we're still gentlemaning to PS2. Did this reaction, was that considered in the rule set implementation, and specifically like the sub rules and such?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was brief mention of like, do we have any issues with gentlemen? I think, honestly, Tony, I think you were one of the people that also asked about this. And as long as the decision does not extend a set in any way, it really didn't seem prevalent to limit like the gentleman rule. So I don't think any TO would care what stage both players agree to, as long as it's 1, not messing with the length of their tournament, 2, not infringing on any copyright issues, like if they're playing on stream or something, or anything that would like inherently, I don't know, mess with like the integrity of a tournament, or like racket manipulation or something like that. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head for that last one, but we didn't really see any reason to limit a gentleman rule. So if people want to start PS2, that's cool. Go for it, man.
Well, there's a way to hurt integrity by gentlemaning to a non-legal stage.
Well, I believe
yeah.
that's specifically addressed in the clause, if I remember correctly.
Fair enough.
So, and that was why that clause was added.
Yeah,
if I recall.
I'm just giving an
Because-
example since Dakpo said I have no idea how that would happen. Well, I do because I've seen it happen at my tournaments, and I had to say, where this game does not count. I'm sorry, guys.
I'd be curious. Can you tell me more? Like, what happened? Were they playing on like Big Blue with their feet or something? Like,
Yeah, they
like,
they gentlemen to Pokemon Stadium 2 Pokeballs on high. And this was not at like a local. This was as like a decently sized, like a PR event. And so I said, like, I don't mind you guys having fun, but it's not fair to the rest of the competitors for you to get a result that then like bleeds over into rankings. That is under like different circumstances than the rest of everyone, and they understood. So it wasn't a big deal, but yeah, I've seen it happen.
interesting. So something on that. So like literally going in, creating like an alternate rule set with items turned on. That's something I would put in the category of extending a set. That is literally taking time to do extra stuff that's not already permitted
That's
and
fair
extending
enough.
a set that way. So that's how I would rule that anyways.
So, Tony, do you have any more questions, or because I have a few, I have like a line of
go ahead.
questioning. Okay, so there's something that I'm really curious about, and I'm curious if it's just like the way you talk about it, or if it's like an actual part of the process. But sometimes you talk about kind of like the influence of the panel, or I think the most generic way of talking about this is sometimes it sounds like there's some sort of curation going on, and I think there's always some degree of curation because you guys send out a survey, right? And like you can never get objective data. You always decide what data you're getting, right? So there's always a degree of subjectivity. But on the one hand, it sounds like you guys are like, okay, well, this is the vote, and so this is what we're choosing. And on the other hand, sometimes I'm hearing things like, okay, and like we decided this and we decided that, and so a decision is kind of like the opposite of just following the data in a lot of these cases. And I'm curious to see, like, was there a degree of like vetoing or like overturning decisions or like steering from the panel and like some specific philosophies behind those choices, or lack thereof, if it was mostly data driven?
Yeah, valid question. So you're basically asking how much personal bias from the panel is represented in the rule set. Is that what
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I'll be really candid, and I'm looking at the data now. I don't think that there was a single decision that the panel made by themselves that isn't directly represented by, like, I could show you a number for just about every single decision that we made. And so the real question is, when I say just about, what kind of decisions did we make that weren't directly from, data? And that would be something like the total ban amount, which is interesting. So I'll list it out like this. Some of the stuff that the panel had to step in because there wasn't data available for it was something along the lines of how strong of a DSR rule there was, because when we asked the direct question of no DSR, MDSR, DSR, it was split evenly across.
Fair enough.
33, 33, 33. And again, we could see it drill down. So when you have something like that that's like completely split, you have to make a decision. DSR, that discussion is actually really interesting because you had 80% of players vote that they wanted some type of DSR, and that it's important that there are multiple stages played on through a set. There's inherent value in that. But not everybody agreed on what kind of DSR, or if they're, whatever levity. So we had to step in, and we went with kind of a middle ground here. So if we have 8 stages, and this, I know you guys know this, but to everybody listening, I just want to make sure to line this out before they go make their own rule set. If you got 8 stages, you need to make sure that whatever ban amount or DSR rules you put in place, you don't run out of stages.
True.
So, like, if you have 8 stages and it is 2 bands and hard DSR, which means you can't go back. You can't go back to the stage. Think about it like this: you have. I'll try not to do this. I'll try to do this without like flipping off the camera. So, 2 bands from one player. 2 bands from one player leaves you with 4 stages, and you play game 1, 2, 3, 4. You would literally run out of stages. For
Because
Element
so
of PS2.
I'm just filling in because not everyone's gonna watch this. Just so you guys know, like hard DSR means you cannot go back to any of the stages that you've won on. And so if you play 4 games, that gets rid of 4 stages, and if you ban 4 stages, you're just out of stages. So
And
please
what is
continue,
modified
Dakpo.
DSR?
Yeah, so modified DSR. Well, actually, I'll get to that last. It makes sense to explain it second, but I actually don't for a very important reason. So that's DSR. You can't go back to any stage that you've won on previously. The other side of that spectrum is no DSR, which means whatever you ban or whatever your opponent bans are the only stages you can't go to. So in an 8-stage list, if you had 2 bans and your opponent had 2 bans and there's no DSR, then you've got 4 stages to go to, and there will be overlap, but you at least don't run out of stages. But MDSR is the middle ground, and it's definitely one of the things that is like most heavily debated that I'm seeing. It's the middle ground of where there is a system in place to encourage you playing on multiple stages, but we don't have to ban as many stages either. So if you have 2 bans, MDSR, which means you can't go back to the last stage you won on, then you don't run out of stages, and there is a DSR type in place. So that's like an example of a decision like the conduct, or I keep on saying conduct panel, sorry, I'm involved in my local conduct panel too. That's the
It's fair.
decision the panel would have to make because we don't have an exact data and we need to make the rule set work, if that answers your question.
It does. And I have a follow-up question. So something that I think is interesting in these types of products is the idea of like vision versus compromise. And so from personal experience, I know that if you're trying to satisfy everyone, you often lose core vision of the project, right? And in my personal experience, and this doesn't always have to be the case, you can never satisfy everyone. And Charles talked about this. Tony talked about this. Charles was talking about all the different parties you're trying to cater to. Tony's talked about, well, specifically Midwest not feeling catered to. Like someone is going to feel burned. And so to compare to the European rule set, I'm European. Hello, I'm the token European for the discussion. So
you.
the way the European rule, you're very welcome. The way the
European
European rule set, exactly, token European. I'm here. The way the European rule set kind of got big is by having a very clear vision, and the vision, just for the people watching, the idea behind the European rule set is 9 stages, no counterpicks, 3 bans, no DSR, and so both players ban 3 stages. That means that you're left with 3 stages total, right? So 9 minus 3 minus 3, 3 left total. 1 will be your starting stage, 1 is the counterpick for player 1, and the other 1 is the counterpick for player 2. Very straightforward. You don't really change, like stage variety was not really factored in here. And so the vision is very simple. What this also means is that you can try to make like variations. I won't get into that, but they're like, because you stick to the vision, it's very easy to kind of like make adjustments while it's still in the spirit of the rule set. And so what happens is when a strong vision comes forth and it catches some steam, it's, in my opinion, a lot easier for people to switch rather than playing some sort of rule set that kind of like caters to no one by trying to cater to everyone. And so my question to you is, what was you guys' philosophy going into this? I know obviously it's like a data-driven rule set, and so I think the idea is to cater to everyone. Do you think you guys succeeded in that? Do you think there's some takeaways there for a possible next time? What do you guys think of just the idea of vision versus compromise?
I think we talked a little bit about this before, and I'll just kind of reiterate it, is that the cool creative part of this project was that the suggested rule set is something that we could put up independent of that, I guess, the catering type of thing. Like if I really wanted to try to take the panel in a way that just straight up copied a lot of other rule sets with some slight changes here. Like, we could have done that too, and it would have been this like really shaky. Like, I couldn't have presented it. We couldn't have presented it to the TOs with so much information and data backing and direction if we had catered it so much. So it was definitely a rule set that is designed with a vision in mind. And it's kind of harsh to say like a vision in mind. Like, again, to be clear, if I came in and it was my rule set, there'd be like 5 stages, or there'd be way more. There'd be like 9 or more. But in terms of what the data did for us, the data pretty much made like a playground of realm of decisions that help guide us make easy decisions. It's easy to see which stages are preferred, where people are usually drawing the line on a stage. So it really, the data also helps with the vision.
So what would you say the vision is then? Because it sounds like it's like just the average of all of the opinions that you got, and so there's not like there's no unified vision behind it in that sense.
I actually want to step in here real quick. So I think,
go ahead.
From what I'm seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dakpo, but I think the vision is to get the data from the player base that is not restricted by skill level. So top players have a say in this, but the average player has more say in this, right? So I think this rule set is based off of the data of the player base, but anything that is split down the middle or the data couldn't get collected by is decided by TOs, right? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Dakpo, but you guys gathered the data, you made multiple rule sets based on the data, presented those different rule sets to the TOs, and the TOs voted, right? That was like the general process of it.
Everything you said is correct except for one thing. We took the data, we created a rule set, and then we presented that suggested rule set alongside established rule sets.
Oh, already established rule sets. Okay, got it.
Already established rule set, yeah.
Okay, so it to me that's what it feels like in terms of like the priority totem pole would be average player, then maybe top player / TO. It could be in the same second tier because top players still had a say in the data, but like the TOs had the final say in the voting and on some of the split decisions, and then viewers had no say. So to me, that's what was prioritized in making this rule set in terms of the priority totem pole is how I'm envisioning it right now. Would you say that's pretty accurate, Dakpo?
I would say it's accurate for the most part. I'd say the only part that's a pretty big unknown is with the survey. I'm not quite sure how we would even assess like who falls into a strictly viewer part of that category. It was aimed towards players, and there was not a whole survey dedicated strictly for viewers. But I would say, I would set the main player base, the average player base, sound like created the groundwork for what we wanted in the stage, and then the panel, basically the TOs and stuff, created a list from that with the curated decisions.
Yeah, I guess you could say that viewers could have, like someone that doesn't necessarily go to Smash tournaments could have saw the tweet and done the survey or something like that, right? Is what your point is?
Yeah, I'm sure that there's somebody who filled out that survey that has not been to a tournament or whatever. It's really hard to
Warrior people.
Right, and obviously...
Man, there was...
Oh, go ahead, Dakpo.
No, I was going to say something completely off topic. I'll save it for the end. It's funny.
Got it. But, I mean, obviously we could go the route of... Hey, buddy, I'm recording. All right. Obviously, we could go the route of just, hey, maybe all these TOs at their regionals or locals or majors could have the surveys in person so we know it's people that maybe at least attended the tournament, right? But remember, no one's getting paid for this, so that takes even more work. And, everyone involved in this is doing it for free for the love of the game. So you got to understand that everything might not be like picture perfect. And maybe in the future we could do some of these like in-person polls or whatever, and that would be really cool to get more accurate data. But, for the resources that this whole team had, I think they still did an incredible job. And it might not be 100% accurate, but it's pretty damn close, I would say.
I really appreciate that because I don't think many people understand that there's not a system in place for this. I don't think they understand that we're doing this all for free out of our own spare time, and we're putting a lot of work into this just to try to make the best thing that we can to hear as many voices and perspectives as possible. So I really do appreciate you mentioning that.
Well, I think that from the layman's perspective, they see the rule set. It's an oddball rule set that just seems really quirky. And they hear it took dozens of people the better part of a year to make this. Like, I could have made this in my on my lunch break today. What are you doing? I don't think that people understand that making a rule set, when there is someone in the room who can look you in the eye and say no, and this stops here, and then you still have to find a way to progress, where there's more no's possible that will halt the process entirely, then you have to thread that needle to find things that have less no's in order to progress. And if you can't, then the process stops there, which is why it hadn't continued before you and Captain L picked up the drive and pushed for that in the first place. It wasn't that this was something that people couldn't come up with. It's much as it was, this was something that people couldn't get through the opening conversation without somebody putting their foot down and saying, my region's not going to have this. This is over. Like, we need to go back to the drawing board, come up with something I can actually show to my people, and then we'll talk. But otherwise, we're not doing this. We're going to run with what we ran with last year. My people are already happy with that, and that's what we'll run with. And so going into the rule set discussion in the first place, and I'm essentially going to make a statement here, Dakpo, but please feel free to correct me on this, is my understanding of the ultimate unifying vision here among the data-driven rule set is that it was there to bring something that could be brought to each region in a way that would allow them to feel that their people, their region, is actually being represented within the rule set. And so that it was not a matter of, oh, well, I'm just playing on somebody from the opposite coast of me, and this is how they would play. My players don't want this.
I love that. Do you want to be like the PR person for all the unified rule set stuff? That was really well said. Like, yeah, okay, no, it's fine, it's fine. But no, I really love.
Yes, I've seen the quote retweets. I'm good. I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah. It's funny because I took like a social media break for like last week. I was like,
it's a wise decision.
I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to log off of all this stuff. And then we got word back from Nintendo finally when they approved everything. I was like, well, here we go. Which is really cool. If you guys didn't know, or if any of the listeners didn't read any of the article or anything, we had quite a bit of a debate on where to put Hollow Bastion as a legal stage, because parameter-wise, stellar stage. 160 units, 160 to blast zones, normal blast zones here, all the normal requirements for a good competitive stage was there, but there's like this looming issue of like copyright issues, which I don't think a normal player is going to be thinking about, but for a TO, they have to think about, how does this affect production? Do we have to mute the audio? Do we have to mute the audio for certain victory animation music? And, do we want a stage as one of our starters to be a stage that some TOs might not want to deal with the production issue, and they're going to have issues if they run it. And we got word that the game has been out so freaking long that these these music agreements are falling off.
Really?
Yeah. So we got that confirmation from Nintendo. We said, hey, Nintendo, these are the stages we want to use for a rule set. We're trying to make a unified rule set. We're worried about, licensing agreements and we're streaming and all that good stuff. Can you give us the okay? And they eventually got back to us like, you look all good. Good luck with your rule set. We hope it works out. And I was like, cool.
That's awesome that they responded. That's sick.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Progress.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm gonna give you a bit of a hard time, and I apologize here, but a few things, and I think I already know the answer from our previous discussion, but I think that a lot of people would be more comfortable with the rule set if they had the data for transparency. Is there a place that they can perceive this data?
I put it all in that article. Nobody read it, but it's all there.
Okay.
Yeah,
All the
so
data?
Like the polling data?
anything
I mean-
that's like pertinent to the results. Like, trying to think if there's anything that I didn't include that's like relevant. Yeah, we talked about DSR, the ban amounts, the stage approval ratings. We talked about the character first. I don't know if I mentioned the counterpicks versus starters statistics too. You
Yeah,
should
said
have
most
just
players.
about.
You said 80% of players wanted counterpicks.
Yeah, that was in the
you did
article.
mention.
That was in the article. Yeah.
Yeah. So anything that's like relevant should be in there, unless people really wanted to know Wario's where's last zone approval. No, I put that in there too.
What
Can-
about
can
the,
I jump in
approval
real
for
quick?
Rainbow Cruise to have Steve players not be able to ban that stage and you can auto take them there?
Sorry.
Give me Halberd.
I do, dude. We talked about this a while back, but
We can
having
nerf
Steve
Steve.
make him not be allowed to pick to participate in the stage picking process. That's fucking raw.
Or we can make Steve players just start off with one loss in the set. They just start off with one loss. That's also a nerf.
But they have to sit through the game. Like they have to disconnect their controller. You can just get their rag on the character.
You just watch a cutscene.
Dakpo, just to clarify, the fact that you put all the stats in there, does that also mean that the way that, for example, you calculated approval rating was very closely tied to, for example, stage length, rather than asking for the specific stage, or was it a bit of both?
No, you're exactly right in the first thing. One thing that was really important to us when we made the survey is we didn't want to like trick anybody. We didn't want to say, "What do you think of 186 units of length? You think that's viable?" I gotcha. That's Pokemon Stadium too. You know, we strongly avoided anything like that. So in the survey, the questions are like, how do you feel about the viability of a stage with 160 units in length, and we give examples of what stages we're talking about, and you could rate it there. And then we'd say, cool. What about the viability of 165 units? So that'd be something like Town and City. Cool. What about something like 187 units, like Pokemon Stadium 2? And so everybody who filled out the survey, very aware. Hopefully they're reading. I don't know. Maybe they're just clicking buttons. But
Brother,
hopefully,
how many people are missing the actual data post on the rule set? Why is Pokemon Stadium 2 a counterpick?
Well, to be fair, I think there's a difference between.
I'm
Dakpo, you're back.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people not reading, but yeah. To
Reading
answer your
hard.
question, yeah, it's we had the information and specifically what aspect of it, because it's cool because we got like different stats for WarioWare. Like some people were totally cool with like how long it were, but we're way more objective to like what the blast zone distance was.
That's
that kind of
fair.
thing.
So I think that what a common vocal complaint here is, which is fundamentally a minority, is top players feeling that they were not a strong determinant of what the suggested rule set is. And this is fundamentally true on a couple of levels. So first of all, top players are inherently a minority because most players are not top players. Second is, as you said before, the primary voters are TOs, not top players. So what would you say for top players who are not comfortable with that?
I think their concerns are very valid. Again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to jump in, because I didn't see any top player representation. And so it really was a call to action for myself too. And if it's interesting because I don't really have authority for anything. It's not like I am a major TO or something. I am somebody who has TO'd some tournaments. I've been a coach for some time. I do coaching in my professional career too. I've been a player for 15 years plus. I have quite a resume of things that would qualify me for. But Do I actually have any power to change stuff? Kind of. I mean, we've come here, and if I have any influence, the next time we make a unified rule set, that's like one of the big things on my docket is how can I get educated top players to make the decision? And I don't know, we've kind of been like circling the topic during this podcast, and I've just been kind of thinking it over. Like, I don't know if it would be too extreme if like I did like an interview with like top players, like with like some simple like stage questions to see if they're like awake, and be like
I would want to
qualified
see
for
that.
it. Yeah, I think that would be something pretty interesting to put together, is like some like type of qualifying like survey, because the last thing I would want to do is have somebody like head a project like this and have like significant influence, like a single source that does not know what they're talking about, that has no clue about any of the stage. Like, there's so much that goes into like a qualification, and it's really facetious of me to like jump in and say I have all the qualifications. But I think for the next unified rule set, having more top players have a part in it, I 100% am in for that. But how? How do we do that? It's interesting. I haven't created a process, nor do I know if I have the influence to do so. But
I have a couple suggestions for that. I think you screening a top player to be on the same power dynamic as one of the TOs. I think you should have a group of top players, not more top players than TOs, but I think a group of top players that TOs can agree on after maybe speaking with them or having them take some kind of test or some shit like that. I don't know how that process would go, but I think top players being a part of that, I think we saw a little bit of it because I do consider you a top player that knows multiple fronts of the community. I think that's very important too, because there's top players that just are players, but then there's our top players that have worked with TOs, have worked and understand the content sphere and understand the ecosystem. I think that's also a big deal. I also think obviously this takes more energy and effort. So, the team has the resources, but like the whole process of like, oh, hey, when you come to this event, like a Genesis or a SmashCon, you can take this survey so your data can be a part of the next rule set, right? And that could also encourage people to show up to that event in person because you have to fill it out in person, right? Something along those lines I think would be really cool. Obviously, again, it takes more resources. Someone's got to sit there and make sure people are filling it out. And then you could give a multiplier, because I do think the PR player will have a better opinion, not all the time, but most of the time will have a better opinion than the region PR player, right? And then the globally ranked player, most of the time, will have a better opinion or maybe better insight on the on stages rather than the local PR player, right? You could have different multipliers, like, oh, okay, if you are a player but you're not ranked in any region, you get a 1x multiplier. If you're a PR player in a local region, you get a 2x multiplier or a 3x or whatever, right? If you are a globally ranked player, you get a 5x or a 4x. I don't know what exactly the multipliers would be, but in this particular survey, the average player had the biggest influence on this particular rule set. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think barrier to entry is important, right? So the average player, like, we need people to go to these tournaments, right? That is very important. But I do think that the higher ranked you are, most of the time, this is not all the time, because there are some people that just play the game and they're just naturally clicks with them and they don't really go into deep dives of stage lists and stuff. But most of the time, that player base has more extensive knowledge of the rule set and how it should be, right? So I don't know what you guys' thoughts on that, but I think that could be something that, especially if given more resources, especially if these other tournaments want to get involved, where Supernova can like have a staff member sit down at a booth. And I think it would also be really cool just to get people to go to the event too, because like going to the event and just having that little bonus of, oh, my voice will be heard, like my data will be put into the next rule set or whatever, right? I think that's really sick.
I wanna say something really quick before I hand it over to the others. If you are a TO and you are interested in this, but you don't know who would do it, and you're interested in flying some individual out, maybe in the next Smash title, you just let me know. If you find me out, I'll run a survey. That's not a problem. But I love that idea. I think I think adding like a levity of having people in person at events fill out like some type of survey that would make them be heard or something like that. I really, really love that idea. It's really a good way to involve people and make sure, like kind of like we were talking about before, that the people that are giving their voice are indeed like 100% in the community. They're committed. They're invested, right?
Yeah, you could even have locals do it too, right? If there's a region that has like 20 to 30 people and they all fill out the survey and send in a packet or an email to someone heading it, like Dakpo or something like that. And it's like, oh, this is, I'll use my region for example that I'm currently at. This is Hawaii, the region of Hawaii. This is our opinions, blah 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 blah, right? And then some of our monthly tournaments get up to 50-ish players, so maybe average of like 50 to 70. Maybe not everyone goes, but like that would be a region, right? Giving you their opinion on their rule set. And then you could have the TOs, the region's TOs, right? And then the region's PR players, and then all the other players, and kind of organize the data like that. I think stuff like that would be really cool on a local level. Obviously, you'd have to do it with local TOs you trust, because you don't want that. You don't want like a region being like, oh, hey, yeah, we had like 500 people. Here's all our data, and it's all skewed in one direction, right? Like, there's got to be a little bit of monitoring and stuff like that, and trust involved.
I have no clue if this is possible, but it'd be really interesting and efficient if we could put something like that in the Start GG sign up page.
That would
like
be insane, because then you could tell if they actually attended the tournament and stuff, right? So it's like this, because my thing is, I want actual tournament goers. I want their data to influence the rule set, not a viewer, not someone, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think rewarding people for actually supporting the community and going to these in-person events, I think that's number one in like how I view it.
I'll have to save that idea for later. Not bad.
Get ready for the next Smash
Maybe
game,
use
baby.
that on like where you would implement things like safety disclaimers. You can just include polling questions there, where they have the checkbox or checkboxes.
Damn, Rulesets has taken us far. Actual democracy.
So, one thing in particular that I would like to make clear as a fairly novel experience set, I guess you could say, or perspective within this process, is I consider myself to have a fairly high level understanding of Smash. And obviously I was also participating as a TO. So within that context, I particularly, to be blunt, don't really like the suggested rule set. And I will also tell you what I said as a TO there, where our first priority is not necessarily to make the most effective rule set inherently, because then you have to get into the weeds on what makes a rule set effective as, both hypothetically on balance, but also for approachability, which is kind of what different extremes, I would say, are represented here. Like with Ramses, obviously, discussing things like balance and how you can change stage selections for that. And obviously, Charles having a bias towards approachability so that somebody can just pick up and play the stage list. And then between these, you kind of have, they're not inherently exclusive, but they do tend to be on a sliding scale. I think DSR is probably the clearest example of that, because for the most part, I think DSR is significantly less popular as you reach into the entrenched aspects of the community. So essentially, top players have a lower opinion of DSR, and it's also not particularly popular within first timers. But then as you go up between theirs, which in terms of bell curve population, that's where most people are. They prefer some gradient of DSR, even though they don't necessarily prefer the same gradient, which is kind of what Dakpo was saying earlier on the polling. And so among these groups, TOs can't please everybody. And so while I can't speak for every single TO, I think most TO and the most common approach to this is to pick the most common person. That is to say, to pick the largest group of people that they can satisfy. And then usually what happens is the minority group or groups end up with the relatively short end of the stick. And this is essentially what we're getting here. where the minority groups or people who don't really like the rule set as much are holding the short end of the stick. And I would include myself in that as a person who doesn't really like this rule set. So as full disclaimer, because obviously they can't just share, or actually I'll go ahead and ask first. Dakpo, can you share what the voting data for the TOs were?
Yeah, I'll pretty much just refer to what I said a little bit earlier. Is if I give that specific voting data, I'm gonna start causing even more divide, because if people are going, cool, this only got this amount of votes, like, I guess, no, my voice wasn't heard, or I'm not represented well, something must have gone wrong. I generally want to avoid that. I will keep it short and simple, that amongst the TOs that did vote, I'm completely transparent with them, with, what the vote is, and at the end of the day, the suggested rule set won the vote.
And I will respect that, and I won't share the data that I think was shared with me in confidence. What I will personally share is my anecdote of how I recall voting. And so what I specifically recall voting for was primarily the EU rule set, and then a component of the voting was that we generally, in order to get things done and actually reach a conclusion, it was decided that we would focus on essentially populist voting with a mutually agreed upon majority. And so when we reached that majority, the EU rule set was not left because it was not a popularly voted upon rule set. And of the stages that were left, I don't believe Midwest was still in the running either. And so I believe that my second choice ended up being actually a Japanese rule set, because there were multiples available. As Dakpo said, there was many rule sets available from, essentially, if it has been run at a major, then it was in contention for the voting process, and which obviously does include Midwest and some very odd rule sets that I remember seeing and not remembering any of it having ever run. So this included questions like when we were originally looking at the suggested rule set were potentially including legal stages like LILAT. And for my personal biases, when I was giving influence on the suggested rule set, if I remember correctly, I was actually in favor of a very small stage list as well, similar to what Dakpo mentioned, where I personally am pretty biased against stages like Town and City, because I think that they are more dynamic and chaotic than I personally think is wise to have in the stage list. And I think I was also against FD as a starter, and I was against Kalos being on the stage list, things like that. But
You
again,
still voted for the European rule set, though. That's my fucking goat.
So, well, that comes down to what we're getting at here is,
yeah,
what is more important, the most effective or honest rule set that I think is best for high level play, or having people use it outside of your living room? Because right now, essentially what we have is the Smash community is on the sliding scale of amateur to professionalism, is closer toward the amateur side, even though we're the most professional that we've ever been, probably. So even though we are relatively organized, at the end of the day, when you have to check what state you're in to know what your rule set is going to be, and then even when you're in the same region, sometimes the rules aren't the same, you never know what you're going to get. And we can't keep having these pull out the toy and see what you're playing with from your cereal box kinds of tournaments. Like, that's just not professional, especially if we're looking forward and planning to work with larger organizations, such as Nintendo, for example. It is going to become increasingly important for us to actually have unity, even though I, again, would have preferred for us to use the existing infrastructure that was already there. So either A, the European rule set, or failing that, the Midwestern rule set. This is where other people who aren't just me agreed. And so the compromise essentially that you are joining in when you partake in that discussion, when you partake in that vote, is that even though I would like for the West Coast and the Midwest and the Northeast to all use the Midwestern or the European rule set, I am in the minority here. So here we are, the voting happened, I am still in the minority. So now am I going to decide that there's, I believe the XKCD comic is, are there now 15 solutions possible instead of 14? Or am I going to suck it up and go with what the majority has voted on and then try and get us down to a unified rule set? And so the answer there is, I think it's generally a matter of you will start seeing Florida move toward following that unified rule set. And don't get it twisted as me just saying, oh, I'm controlling Florida. The various TOs of Florida are independently coming to the conclusion it is good to work together. It is good to be unified. I see this opportunity that is presented to me. I'm going to at least try it out. If my region, if I show up to tournaments and my attendees are telling me no, I'm going to say no. And I'm going to turn around and I'm going to do whatever my attendees want. Because at the end of the day, the people who matter most to me aren't just a single top player, although top player opinions do matter to me. It is all of my attendees. Essentially, what it comes down to is the customer base. It's just really basic stuff. The people who are the reason you're going to have another event, unless you're just planning on throwing one final crazy wacky event where you just do your ideal rule set, you are going to listen to the people who are going to pay your door fees, who are going to actually pay the tens of thousands of dollars that you put down on that venue, if not hundreds of thousands in some cases. And if you don't, you will never run a tournament again because you're going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And that's just the bare reality of these kinds of situations, which is what we were alluding to earlier. So as Dakpo and Charles both said, yes, the TOs have a higher stake, but at the end of the day, if it comes down to the groups who are both deciding, if top players think that all of the TOs tournaments rule sets are wrong, and the TOs think all of the top players tournament rule sets are wrong, and neither group agrees to interface with the other, what happens is you're still going to have tournaments that don't have top player rule sets, but now top players need to figure out how to run tournaments. And so
that is not happening. I'll tell you that right. Ain't no fucking way any top player, I mean, not any, but I would say most top players will not go through that endeavor.
Probably not. And it's not really worth it. You are better off staying home and streaming if that is your goal. But of course, it all comes down to there being a series of interwoven goals that we all want. The O Tour is not going to Genesis planning to play in grand finals, although they might dream of it. They know realistically, probably, that they are going there to attend the event, to see people, to play a game, to have fun, socialize with other people. And so that is something that needs to be facilitated at the same time that we also have a reasonable rule set for top players to play against each other in grand finals. And so you kind of have to balance that. And whenever these are at odds, what typically happens, which is what I think happens here, is the populist vote is going to go toward the middle of that bell curve. And so here we are. The middle of the bell curve is not what I personally agree with, but as part of that essentially social contract, I am going to give it the same shot as the rest of the TOs in Florida. And I'm going to at least do my part for us to have a unified rule set. And then from there, once we have an infrastructure, once we have an agreement, which is something you can see for the most part in Europe. Now, not every single European tournament runs the European rule set, but most of them do. And so the same thing ideally will happen here in the US, and that might be optimistic, but it requires us to do our parts for those of us who have the ability to essentially affect this outcome because of whatever coincidence or situational power we just so happen to have. And the reason for this is so that in the future, as Dakpo alluded to, we can then adjust the rule set to come closer to that theoretical that involves more top players so that we can get a more effective rule set for game balance and such, or whatever we decide that should be, because there's a lot of finger pressing on the weights here for what game balance is. Like, maybe if I make this change to the stage list or to the timer, it affects Steve's likelihood to win or Sonic's likelihood to time something else, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we've discussed rule set and their effects on game balance before in this podcast. And we've had top players on this podcast before to discuss this. So these are not new concepts. But I wanted to specifically point out that at the end of the day, this ultimately is a compromise that is a way forward toward a greater end goal in the future. And so it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, this isn't my ideal stage list. Well, there needs to be a prototype before the ideal stage list. And what we're looking at is essentially that intermediary stage. And so I do ask people to be patient, reasonable, and read the full breadth of things before you make full conclusions, before you mock, and before you specifically dismiss things. Try and hear the whole thing and try and pay attention to what someone else's goals are. And this is not even just for Smash, but in anything. Try and hear the other party or parties out all the way. And just to be clear, I do mean that to be a two-way street. I do think that, as mentioned before, top player opinions are still valid. European opinions, even though it's a North American stage list, are still valid. And
The Penguins
to that
matter.
end, I would like to give a shout out to, I believe it was Telu, for actually being someone to, God rest his soul, sit in on weird timings of meetings to give advice and perspective from a European, just so that we could have that additional perspective, to give criticism where he thought that it was available, and I believe he was also someone who specifically referenced PS2, among others, as a potential issue, and to make sure that we were accounting for that, things like that. So I appreciate our token European friends who...
Yay, that's me.
Yes, we love you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think giving the ranked players globally or regionally more say in it, I think that's valid criticism, or something to think about going forward to the next unified rule set whenever that one is made. If there's a Type 2 for Ultimate, I hope there's not, because that would be having Ultimate for a really long time, or hopefully the next Smash game.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, and again, this just takes a lot of work, so much appreciation to the team. And I think this prototype, do I think that players are not going to go to a tournament because PS2 is a counterpick and FD is a starter? I'm going to keep it a buck. I doubt it. Like, if that's the driving force in your opinion to not go when you get 2 strikes anyway in a starter stage of 5, right? And you can just gentleman the PS2 anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's that crazy. But it is out of the norm, right? But I do think, I mean, we can even just talk about our own personal opinions on this, just FD being a starter. I do think it's a very volatile stage just because of how some characters work. So I get the reasoning behind it of wanting it to be a counter pick, but I think there's enough stage strikes that you're going to take away your 2 worst stages on the stage strike anyway, right? And then of the other 3 available stages, I don't see that many characters are like, well, I'm just Omega fucked on these other 3 stages. You know what I'm saying? I personally don't feel like it's that big of a deal, but I'm not an active competitor. What are your guys' thoughts? I'd especially love to hear from Dakpo and Ramses, since you guys both actively compete in the game. Just like the whole, because I mean, that's the biggest controversial thing, right? And I'd just love to hear our personal opinions, just as what we think about that, because that's what we're seeing, like, feedback wise. But I personally don't think it's that big of a deal, just because of the gentleman, the PS2, and then I just feel like there's gonna be 3 stages of the 5 starter stages there that your character's not gonna suck on.
Do you want to go first, or should I? What do you prefer?
I'll go real quick. And to Charles' point, if you're striking 2 stages and the last 3 stages are still atrocious for you, your character's probably trash, dude. Like it's probably low tier, and you're probably going to perform lower at tournament. And I don't think a stage list is going to save you. So I agree with that point. And I'll let Ramses go, but after this, if we have time, we can definitely talk about PS2 and why it's a counterpick. I don't think we've actually like broached the topic itself.
Yeah, I would love to
really
hear our personal opinions, because I feel like right now we are mainly talking about the rule set, and I don't mind going a bit longer on this one because it's an important topic. But yeah, because we didn't really get too much of our personal opinions. It was kind of just like, what was the process, what was the data, right, and all that stuff. So I'd love to just get our personal takes, because I think the viewers would love to hear that.
Cool. I'll let Ramses jump in, and then I want to jump in on the FD discussion, because there's a discussion about is Kalos an FD? Is Town and City an FD? And I think that's really important to talk about
Oh,
as well.
that's a good topic.
I'll cover that after Ramses.
Yeah. So my opinion about FD being like a starter and PC being counterpick, I get it, having listened to the way Dakpo describes it. My personal opinion is that this shouldn't be something that you look at like a case by case basis. Like, oh, the system sucks, but practically it kind of works out. So, for example, saying like, oh well, FD is fine because you can just ban it, and there's no character that's like fucked on the remaining two stages. And if it is, your character sucks. I think like it practically, if that is the case, sure, like like that's something that is certainly worth considering. But I rather like, and maybe this is just the software engineer in me or the game designer in me, whatever you want to call it. But I like to design like an elegant system that is ready for edge cases. And I think that's part of the reason why I like character first, which is also something that you guys are doing. We talked about that at the beginning of the podcast. I think that's a really awesome change because also like the thing about stage first, it's really not a big deal in this game most of the time. But that's because of the culture, right? Like no one has a pocket Kazuya that can fuck you up on FD when you counterpick their floaty to FD. And so like it's not like the system is good, it's just that it doesn't get abused. And I think FD being a starter is a very similar thing. It's not a good system, it just doesn't really get abused. The closest that we've seen to real like proper stage abuse in tournament was Proto Banham, right? With the Min Min and Lucina. And even then, like Lucina is nowhere near abusive enough to really make it any sort of egregious. And so my personal philosophy is very simple: is like you legalize, like you set criteria for what should make a stage illegal, which is something that I discussed earlier on a podcast, where it's like, okay, well, no duplicates, and then you set like certain circumstances for what counts as duplicates.
Platform layout, yada, yada, yeah.
Platform, yeah, exactly, but not just platform layout, but also like similarities in dimensions, right? So like something like Yoshi's on Battlefield, that can coexist, or as Small Battlefield and PS2 can coexist, but Midgard and Battlefield, not quite sure, right? And so you set your circumstances for what constitutes a legal stage, and then you would legalize all of the stages that that should not be banned under your criteria. And so instead of looking at it from a perspective of, oh, we should balance and we should make these decisions for it balance, and like you want to detach yourself from that as much as possible and just say like, these are the stages, these are the criteria that we think are reasonable because we are trying to create like because of certain goals, right? And those goals you can try to make as objective as possible, but at the end of the day, there will always be a degree of subjectivity. But things like walls, for example, have proven to be just like not very competitive, and a certain degree of hazards as well. And so we can try to agree as a community on like what circumstance, like what criteria should form a legal stage, and then kind of like just make everything legal. And preferably not have counter picks and starters, because now we're deciding, and we're kind of like manually balancing things by deciding, oh, this should be counter pick and this should be legal. I think that's very I think decisions like that you can almost never get right. And that's also why I don't like DSR, because DSR is like super arbitrary. Just like the design of counter pick and starters, it's super arbitrary. And so my personal take is like, get criteria for legal stages, and then slash all the stages that don't fit under criteria, make them all legal, and do full stage striking. If you have a stage too many, you get rid of essentially the most borderline stage, right? However you want to define that, so that you can actually do full stage striking. So if you have 10 stage, you have to bring it to 9. It kind of just play from that perspective. That is my take. And so I think the idea of FD being a starter, it's not necessarily an issue with FD. It's not necessarily being an issue with FD being a starter. I think the issue is just the whole surrounding system makes, to me personally, my personal philosophy, it makes no sense. And so I think the perfect stage list is actually not the European stage list, because I think if you set criteria, you can argue that Yoshi's and Kalos are both not very competitively viable stages. Now, on the other hand, you can argue that stages like what's it called, Northern Cave and Unova are legal. Again, there's arguments for and against both of these as well, like copyright and visibility and blah blah. But I think if you want to have like a universal or to me at least a universally like unoffensive stage list, You have 7 stages. You take like the European rule set, remove Kalos and Yoshis. That's 7 stages, full of stage striking, 2 bans. Both players ban 2 stages. You get 3 remaining stages, 1 neutral stage, 1 counterpick for player 1, 1 counterpick for player 2. Essentially the same rule set as Europe, because most Europeans don't play on Kalos and Yoshis, because these stages are generally pretty binary or pretty volatile, depending on which one you're picking. And so, like, my personal opinion is just like, don't try to make decisions, don't try to make it arbitrary, and try to just like same thing as character selection, right? Like, we're not adding a whole fucking character. Like, here are your starter characters, here are your counterpick characters. No, it's just like, these are the characters that are illegal. They're illegal because they're competitive, and so we play them. And there's more nuance to it. I'm describing it as a very simple process. I know there's way more like ifs and buts and like edge cases, etc., etc., and it's never that simple. But I do think the approach is way more elegant than trying to create an objectively good stage list out of a bunch of very arbitrary established rules. And so that's my take. If you want to give a specific answer, I think within the context of the stage list that was released, I think FD should not be a starter. But I also understand why FD is a starter, because of how they are making decisions surrounding having variable platform layouts for the starters. And so that's a balanced decision. And while I don't inherently agree with it, within the context of that balanced decision, I totally get where they're coming from.
Well,
and if I were in their shoes and I had to make that same choice, I would make it.
Well, your issue is more along the side of the starter and counterpick system even being a thing, right? That's more,
yeah, and then
yeah.
like the entire system just makes no sense to me. It's very arbitrary.
I agree, and I'm with Dakpo too in terms of my general mentality. If it were me and my general opinion of the rule set, I would go more along the lines of 5 stages, no counterpicks, just one of every platform layout. We as a community pick which platform layouts are the best. And the big reason why I say this is because there's not a lot of tri-paths to pick from, but there's a bunch of biplats, right? And then the whole like FD, but is Town and City FD? Is it not? Like there's just so many things going on there where it's like, well, this platform layout has a bunch of viable stages. This platform layout, not so much. This other platform layout, it's got 2, and you know what I mean? And then we start getting into this weird area where I would rather just keep it super simple. It's just 5 stages, 5 different platform layouts. Wham, bam, we're done. I mean, what, you do like 1 state or 1 ban with MDSR, or maybe just 1 ban period. Just I personally would just probably do 1 ban or something along those lines. I mean, you can throw in MDSR if you want more stage variety. I also don't agree with the whole outlook of like, oh, hey, we want players to play on more stages to show more skill expression. Like, this game is already so hard. This game is so hard. And on top of that, you have to know, like, 90 fucking matchups. Like, I don't think it's that crazy when someone wins because, like, oh, well, I knew I could do this on this platform or not this platform. Like, on this stage, but not on that stage. I would rather just want to see good Smash. And I just feel like putting that much more on the player, to me, I just think it's redundant, and it already makes a really hard thing to do even harder.
So your issue isn't necessarily with the layouts, but with just having less knowledge checks for the players.
Yeah, and my vision, I'm Omega macro. Like, I take a step back and I look at the whole ecosystem, and I just want it super simplified, but I also want competitive integrity kept. But I don't think I think simple is competitive. That's my outlook on it. I don't think someone knowing how to do a specific combo on PS2, but then they do it differently on small battlefield, like, that is technically more skill expression, but I don't think we have to go that far. I don't think we have to be that hardcore. Fair. And I actually think that drives, like, to me, that feels like gatekeeping. That's how I feel about it. I feel like we're making the entry to barrier harder for no reason, right? Because how annoying is it? Like, oh shit, I guess I forgot I can't up smash that platform. I can't up smash on PS2, but I can on small battlefield. Fucking whoopsie, I just lost that set. Like that kind of shit to me just makes the game harder, and the entry, like the skill barrier to enter into the scene, just why is that necessary? I don't see why that's necessary. And I think the people that appreciate that is a very small percent. of
Right.
competitors and viewers. Shit, a lot of viewers won't even fucking know unless the commentator points it out, you know? Like, oh, snap, you tried to do that, but you can't do it on PS2, but you can do it on Small Battlefield.
I think the issue with that is that at the end of the day, like, you get into a lot of like arbitrary decision making. In the sense of like, okay, we keep it simple with 5 stages. Okay, what 5 stages? We do one of each platform layout. Okay, why? You know, like, oh, keep it simple. We play only on, like, let's play only on Small Battlefield then. You know what I mean? And so we're banning content because that's essentially what we're doing, right? When we're deciding not to play on a stage, we're banning content. And so if we say we ban content for the sake of simplicity, I can argue, okay, well, let's ban like half the fucking cast. No one plays them anyway. Like, no one plays me Swordfighter. Ban that motherfucker. Just like you say, no one plays on Lila. Ban that stage. You know what I mean? And like, of course, like, that is
for, right? Like, are you
right.
for the old heads that have like 10 years of, you know, skin in the game, and they want to be able to beat someone because they knew how to do X, Y, and Z, and they labbed for 5 ever, and the other person didn't, and they don't know how to play on those. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and I totally get that. That's most of the people that go to tournaments are like that, but I look at it in a macro sense because I want to make the pie bigger. I want there to be more individuals that can make this a career. I want 10 years from now when some kid's like, I want to be a pro Smash player. I don't want like their parents laughing at them. Like, you know how much people can actually do that? You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I want. I want more people to enjoy the game and be able to make a career out of it. But because I have that bias, I have to dunk on the old school way of thinking a lot. And I understand that. And it just kind of depends. It depends on what route you want to go, but that's my personal opinion. And you can't, there's no one decision that pleases everyone, right? Everyone will have bias towards a certain path, but it's just which path do you think is beneficial for the community? But I'm thinking in a macro sense, and I'm thinking what's beneficial for the community because I want more people to make this a possible career, right? That's my end game. But there's other people that are just selfish, or maybe they're not selfish, and that maybe that's what their core Smash value is, and that's what they're really passionate about, right? And that's what they truly think that like pure Smash, like that's what that is. Or there might be some people that are selfish and it's just like, well, shit, I know how to do this shit, so, or I got the time to lab all these other things out, so I want it like that, right? Who knows? But everyone has their reasonings for it.
For sure. I think that's something you got to keep in mind, right? Everyone just wants what's best for the game. It's just that there's a lot of different opinions, and there's no one out here who's.
I wouldn't say everyone wants what's best for the game.
Okay, well, some people want what's best for themselves.
Most people want what's best for themselves.
Yeah, that's fair.
I want what's best for the game. That is my
greedy viewers.
Right, there's nothing wrong with that. There's not absolutely.
Most people want what they think is the best outcome. Let's look like at that. And so no one is here to like fuck you over specifically.
Correct.
They're just trying to get their, you know, like get whatever they want to get out of it. And that's why I think it's so important to have like an elegant system rather than like basically we want to eliminate as many arbitrary choices as possible. Because at that point it's easier to unify, it's easier to adjust also what we have, because instead of adjusting every individual choices, you can adjust the underlying system, right? And so you get a more consistent kind of like logic as a result. And so I think there's a lot of room for practical solutions, especially because of how developed the scene is, in the sense of there's a lot of history, there's a lot of standards. And so there's a lot of room for practical solutions to say, we're going to simplify 5 stages, these are the layouts. And this is the reason, and it's gonna work because I understand how the scene works, and like that's true, like that's 100%, like there's room for that. I just personally, I don't think it's a very scalable solution, and I don't think it's a very easily sellable solution. And so that's my complaint with a lot of these rule sets, is that I feel like there's a lot of like values that to me seem so arbitrary. Like for example, 80% think we should have counterpicks. And so like at that point, again, if I make a rule set, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that's just your opinion, man. Like let's go with something that we can present from like a systemic point of view and say like, this is the vision. We're looking for something that, you know, where we don't have to make the arbitrary balancing decision of creating counterpicks and starters, because I don't think anyone can make an arbitrary balancing decision outside of the game developers, right? And we kind of have to deal with that. And so we don't do that, and we say like, well, that's your opinion. You're going to have to get used to that not existing anymore. I think that's the way. I think that's a more scalable solution in the long term. And I think there's going to be a point, maybe in a future Smash game, where the Band-Aid is going to have to get ripped off anyway, because the system it just fucking sucks. Like, let's just be fair. Like, starter counterpick just fucking sucks.
So what I think is an answer to that, which has already been done, is
Mhm.
the arbitrary decisions should be made by the people that have the most amount of financial commitment to the game, right? That's how
Right.
this technically was done, with the exception of pro players didn't have as much punch as the average player because they got outnumbered, right? So I think
Mhm.
criticism for the next one is like, I think the two most financially invested parties are TOs on top by a margin, then a solid second place is professional players, then a solid third place is the average player base, right? So I think giving them X amount of power and even moving some of the pro players up into the council of TOs, if they have the knowledge and are qualified, and if the TOs accept their knowledge of the game, right? They're not just someone that presses the buttons and are really good at it, but they actually know
Mhm.
in depth about Smash and can break things down to the TOs in a pro player's perspective, right? So I think the arbitrary choices being left to the individuals in the community that are the most financially invested make the most amount of sense to me, at least.
I agree with that. Yeah.
To be fair, I don't know that I want to just travel all the way across the country to go to this tournament where the rules are made to benefit all these people who are already here, when I'm like dropping my entire month's rent on travel and hotel expense to go tourist
But
at
that
this
party
tournament.
still gets heard. You're third in line,
Yeah.
right? So it's there is still a third party that's still invested, and that would be the average player base, right? So the average player base that are not sponsored or professional or ranked or whatnot. So that player base, you still get heard, and your data is still pooled up with everyone else's, but you just don't have as high impact of the two other parties ahead of you, which I think is fair, right? You kind
I
of
think
make the
that is fair.
hierarchy based on who is financially invested.
And to that note, so hypothetically, if StartGG did give us sufficient survey data so that
Fuck,
we
that
could
would be
actually
insane.
break down
That'd be so good.
demographics, so that we could both identify what or how seeded or how excellent someone performs relative to their survey responses, and we can actually differentiate the difference between average tournaments attendee, the spectators, and even the viewers, ideally. Then, Dakpo, what do you think that you would do to use that differentiation within your survey to better inform the rule set?
Be interesting to get that type of data, because if you have such like a pinpoint definition of each data point, then you can, in theory, put weight to it, right? So if we see that this demographic is submitting these types of results and they make up such a large portion, do we weigh that opinion more than another? Do we create another minority situation? Do we give voice more to the larger people who are invested? It's interesting. I think if we did have access to all that and like a more targeted like data points like that, I think it would definitely be worth at least discussing like I guess it'd at least be worth discussing if we would want to put more weight into like a different type of vote. Because just the conversations we've had today, we've already discussed how we are in favor of putting in more weight to a TO, or more weight to, how financially invested you're in. So it'd definitely be a point of conversation. I can't imagine why it wouldn't at least be in the realm of possibilities.
For every round you win, your survey answer counts for like 1 point extra, 1.08.
Well, I mean,
That would be
even if you were
insane.
to,
What you're really fighting
even
for.
if you were to pentuple the value of a top player, or say top 10%, or just quadruple it, you would still essentially have a minority relative to the greater population of the tournament, but it would be a lot closer to even.
That's why we give them an extra point per win. So like the tournament winner has like 10 round wins or some shit. Like bam, times 10, baby.
Can't let I know he loves WarioWare. I can't let him win.
You like get this
Speaking
round and
of
you're like, my
Dak-
opinion now matters more than yours, and it's like a loser's bracket.
It's literally true.
Sorry, bro. My
I
opinion
beat
matters
you,
more
so
now.
you're not right. I beat you, so you're incorrect, bro.
Sorry, 2-2er. I'm a 3-2er. Come back later. We'll see if your word matches mine. Speaking of Dakpo, you said you had some WarioWare stories, I believe.
Oh yeah. So I didn't advise Captain L to do this, and I maybe we briefly talked about it, but at the end of the survey there was an open note thing where you could just put whatever you want, and it ended up being like this huge conglomeration of just all sorts of wild answers. Everything ranging from what you'd expect, lots of band Steves, lots of Keith Steve's legal, which is just for transparency's sake, way outside the scope of what the survey was supposed to be. The things talking about, can you please give an individual kiss to each of the luminosity staff for me? And just
Did you?
The trolls were out.
what? I need to get on that.
Yeah. We're all
We
waiting.
had some people asking to consider 4 stocks.
Whoa,
Jesus
that's crazier
Christ.
than my timer suggestion.
That's insane.
Every match goes to time now. Please.
There was some pretty interesting conversations. People wanting to bring back stage groupings, which man would that complicate things. But like I get the idea.
I get the idea. It kind of like it's a band-aid over the whole like, oh, this one only has 2, but this one has 3, and you just kind of group them. But that goes against the whole like making it the barrier entry easy, right?
Yeah, for you young kiddos listening, that actually happened for a little bit at the end of Smash 4. We had Battlefield and Dreamland tied together as a single band for a little bit, which was interesting. It did not stick, but it happened. We had some people saying that, what does it say? There's so many. Have the Dame rule set for every county. I'm pretty sure they mean country. County in the world, but better.
I think
I'll
that's
leave that
something we can all get behind.
Yeah. Oh man, just a bunch of fun stuff here. A lot of band Steves. Too many big stages, too few small stages. Not my fault. Blame Nintendo for that one. Actually, no, that's the WarioWare lovers. That's where they really come through. But yeah, this open rule section or the open comment section was just wild. A lot of people on both sides of the fence. One that's like value top players' opinions most for this attempt because making a unified rule set, the top cut 40% players that make it out of pools, but not top cut 35%. Players that don't make it out of pools 25%. I don't know what that means. That was kind of chopped up. I think they're saying if you make it out of pools, make it out of pools, your opinion should. It's not that hard to make it out of pools, and that might be blasphemous. I'm on a new controller. I went 2-2 at Combo Breaker and made it out of pools on a new controller. Like I don't know how.
Well, pools is such a loose term too, because some pools are smaller than others. Like sometimes pools will go all the way up, and if you get out of pools, you're in like top 128. Other times you make it out of pools, that wasn't even like 20 or 30% of the tournament out. You know what I mean? Like it really depends on the size of the pool. So that person throwing out a bunch of number percentages and then throwing the word pools at the end just totally invalidated all of those numbers thrown.
The last thing I'll read here is one of the WarioWare comments, and it's a big block of text, but I'll summarize it and just say that they feel that the only way to truly balance the rule set for these slow characters like Incineroar is to either take away all the big stages or give us way more small stages like WarioWare, which is perfect, balanced, and should have been in the rule set since the day one.
See what happens when you're balancing with your rule set? You have to legalize WarioWare. Kids, don't balance through your rule set.
Not even once.
I'm going to give an example. Okay. So in Smash 4, there is this mechanic called Rage, right? So the whole idea behind Rage is slow and heavy characters were always bad in Super Smash Brothers, right? So I think the devs, I don't know if this was their exact intent, but I'm assuming it is, because obviously the more heavy you are, the more rage you can have, and you get to increase your knockback the higher the percent you have. Guess which characters utilize rage the most? It was all the top tiers. Bayo and Cloud were the biggest abusers of rage, especially Bayonetta. Not a slow, heavy character, but in fact, a very quick, mobile combo character utilized rage the most. So I'll tell you right now, you can legalize Warrior Wear to make Incineroar kill you at 30, but imagine what other characters are going to be able to do. The really quick mobile characters, or the crazy combo characters that fan you out horizontally and stuff. I guarantee you that I've never tested any of this, but I would bet so much money that Incineroar is not even the best character on WarioWare.
It's probably like Sheik. It's honestly probably Sheik, right? Like you just combo to
Bayo
the
sounds
side
pretty
and then
crazy
like
too.
Bayo
I can think
too,
of a
yeah.
combo character and who's already meta relevant and can minecart you onto the blast zone and almost kill you on normal stages.
Try avoiding ABK when ABK takes up the whole map.
Yeah.
Oh God, Steve, Jesus Christ!
Diamond forward smash at 10. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you
Let's
spawn
not
in at
forget-
0. Dude.
Let's not forget that stage also has insane platform camping because the top platform is up so high. So like Bayo will be like ABKing, she misses, she double jumps to the platform, and then she can like down B on the top platform, or drop through and down B on the middle platform, or drop through and down B on the bottom platform, and then she can do like 20 other mix-ups too. Like good luck catching her landing. And if
Finally
you're wrong,
making witch time good.
if you're wrong and she witch times you and it's on a platform, you fucking die. So like, hey, aren't we having fun?
Yeah, that's my big thing about Kalos too. I just think Kalos has
Yeah,
so
Kalos is not
much
okay.
defensive things. I mean, including the stage lengths, but the blast zones, the walls, the platforms. I know this is like a very rare case, but like, dude, there's like characters that can just certain characters can't catch other characters on Kalos, which I think is a problem. Like Sheik just bouncing fishing left and right against like an Olimar or something, right? Or ZSS going left and right, Diddy Kong. Like there's so many flip kick characters that can just camp out other characters by going left to the right platform. I actually want to hear Dakpo's opinion on stage size. I know that's something you were very adamant about, and you even went into depth about informing people in this poll about character or stage size. Could you just give us a quick breakdown on your knowledge about just stage sizes and how that goes into play in making a stage list? Because I think that was a huge part of this stage list, which is why I think a lot of people might be surprised about the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I don't think it's so hard to know what these numbers are. Like, I feel like a more equipped game geared toward a competitive community would have stats like this readily available for their players. But
maybe with a training mode.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate this is not easily accessible information. You have to dig, you have to know what resources to look at. So if you don't know, then I will happily educate you on a lot of the basics. And so a lot of the measurements in Smash are done by units. And for example, a very standard stage, I would say like the most standard one could probably be something on the battlefield. So battlefield is 160 units in length. Okay, this is pretty much the magic number. A lot of the time, blast zones from the ledge to the blast zone, that is also usually 160 units. So you'll see 150 units in stage length for battlefields. You'll see it for small battlefield. You'll see it for Final Destination. You'll see it for Hollow Bastion. You'll see it for Kalos, Northern, Lilat. A lot of stages are just 160 units. And of course, you're going to have your deviations. So like Town and City is a little bit longer of a stage. It's 165. It's not a lot longer, but it is longer. And it's really important to point that out. And I feel like stage discussions, in my mind, will go super south, super quick. And it'll be a knowledge check for me when they tell me that Final Destination is a long stage. And I'll know, okay, so you don't really need long because it's 160 units. Same with Kalos. People think Kalos is like 400 years long. It's 160 as well. The side platforms, that's a different discussion. They kind of hang off the lip. And so there's
Right, they kinda
obviously a
extend
discussion
it.
of like your,
Yeah.
your character can literally position off, but in terms of the length at the bottom, it's 160 units. Some of the big normal stages that we have that really stray from this is Smashville. Smashville's on the opposite side of that. So Hollow Bastion, which is why Hollow Bastion is a preferred starter in this list, is the 160 units. But something like Smashville, its stage width is like 140 units. I'm rounding a little bit, but it's like around 20 units shorter than a normal stage, and that's considered a small stage. Pokemon Stadium 2 is like 187. If I actually round it, it's 188, which is like 27 to 28 units longer than a
Is that the
normal
biggest
stage.
jump from a standard 160 unit stage is PS2?
Pokemon Stadium 2 is the largest deviance out of any stat, any parameter to any normal stage. And I've talked about this before with other people, but it's really important to understand that Pokemon Stadium 2, when the game came out, since we had the ability to turn hazards off, it was the first time we had a biplat layout without hazards, and players loved it. And it became an integral part of our tradition and our culture within the community, and we go to Pokemon Stadium 2 all the time because it was the first time we had a cool bi-platform layout without any hazards. Little did we know, 2 years later, I think in COVID, they would release Small Battlefield, which is just the kind of universal version of the bi-platform layout. And I find it weird nobody's talked about why Nintendo would specifically put out a bi-platform stage. It seems really left field. Nobody was expecting for it or asking for it. But it leads to an interesting situation of where we have this established culture and tradition of playing on Pokemon Stadium 2 a lot because we like the layout. Nobody cares about the stats because it doesn't matter. There are no other like biplats that we care about at that point. And then we have Small Battlefield come out, and it's 160 units, and we kind of don't know what to do with it. It's in a lot of weird places in the rule sets. Before I get too far into that, that's just a small snippet of, yes, Pokemon Stadium 2 is by far the highest deviation out of our normal legal stages. If we had some more stuff, even Yoshi's Story is not as big a deviation as Pokemon Stadium 2 is. In fact, you have to start getting into your super controversial stuff like Castle Siege is about the level of difference that Pokemon Stadium 2 is to our standard 160. That's where it starts getting crazy.
Wow.
In terms of upper blast zones, your magic number is around 180, but that one has a lot more variance because obviously if you have platforms like Battlefield, they raise the ceiling up to 190 or something like that. And that creates a little bit more variation. And that's why Callus is really interesting because it's a really high ceiling, not quite as high as Battlefield, but it's still really high.
Really high for not
that's
having
pretty much
that high platform, essentially, right?
Right. And so it creates definitely a unique flavor of having big blast zones with normal-ish stage parameters. I'm not going to speak on the tactics and strategies because that's a whole nother topic that I could talk about, which weirdly I feel like not enough people are talking about. They're way more focused on FD than they are Kalos, where people can literally not interact with you on. But I think it's just a feel good, feel bad kind of situation. But those are the normal parameters of the stage. 160 is usually your magical number. And if you guys ever want to check it out, just go to turnameta.com. It has all the stage comparison tools. Really cool. I'm super glad that some random person just programmed it and made it before we get most of our data.
And this is, of course, listed in old Twitter posts.
It is an article. That's a crazy call, Tony. You're saying I prepared it to where other people could look at this data too. That's crazy. What a great call.
Reading is hard, though. You should have thought about that.
And you know what? That's why we're on shows like this. So maybe they can just listen and they don't have to read. So
Yeah, they're muting us
That's
after
why
about an hour and a half.
podcasts are so successful because people can listen instead of reading. There we go.
Yeah. Well, I can't read 1.5 speed. I can listen to the podcast though.
it's true.
Did you guys just want to
Um,
wrap up on the FD discussion? FD tying, like people calling Town and City and Kalos like FD 2 and 3. You guys, any opinions on that?
That's very specific.
Yeah,
I know it's a pretty big general
I know.
topic for stage lists.
Also,
Yeah.
fun point of facts, just for the poetry of the situation, the soft topic is back in Brawl, for those who are not old enough for this, a very controversial opinion that was on the forefront of stage discussion at the time was that Pokemon Stadium 2 was the most neutral stage in Brawl. And it was a very controversial opinion that was something of a meme at the time that has now come full circle into where's my Pokemon Stadium 2? That's the most neutral stage I have.
That is funny.
I've played on that stage in tournament in Brawl. Can you
I
believe
believe
that?
you. Yes, I can.
Germany's crazy,
Rainbow
bro.
Cruise, Halberd, I mean,
yeah,
Norfair.
Rainbow
I
Cruise,
remember
Yeah,
getting
but
counterpicked on
PS2
Frigate.
PS2 was different. PS2 Jungle Japes too. I played on Jungle
Picto
Japes. Fuck
Chat. Oh yes.
Picto Chat. Dude, Picto Chat is my favorite stage, actually.
Picto Chat is my favorite stage in Brawl too.
There you go.
Yes.
Hey, birds of a feather.
All right, you were saying, Dakpo, I apologize for taking us off tangent there.
No worries. Two quick notes on that. You guys are all wrong. The best stage that's ever been was the what's the Smash 4 stage that had everybody like you could like draw and it would pop up in the background and it was like a battlefield layout.
Oh my god, I know what you're talking about. Damn it. What was the stage called though?
Wait,
Uh,
Miiverse?
Yes.
yeah. I think it was a meme or something like that, and it was the most hilarious stage. People would post like Game of Thrones spoilers and all sorts of ridiculous images.
People would post Zero Suit Samus drawings, if you know what I mean.
And
Yeah, some detailed drawing.
My
It had to be connected to
so
the
that
game.
and Mario Maker.
But getting back on topic and just kind of wrapping up the PS2 thing, yeah, if you guys want a more in-depth like idea of why PS2 is a counterpick, just read the article. We tried to stay as close to a unified 160 in stage stats, and Small Battlefield is a really, really awesome stage in that regard. And it's really off the beaten path because we're used to the tradition that is PS2. But if we're just going by numbers and basically how it fits into comparatively to other stages, Small Battlefield just makes a ton of sense. And I really encourage everybody, just give it a shot. Playing on Small Battlefield probably will be just fine for you. But that's something only time can tell. And obviously, I'm not here to shut down on your favorite stage. If PS2 is your favorite stage, then I don't mean to like exclude you from the community or anything. Hopefully, moving it to a counterpick isn't gonna ruin your
Just
competitive
gentlemen,
experience.
you'll be fine. Don't worry. The other person will probably be down too. Like
You can still start every tournament set with PS2, and that hasn't changed. They just, if they say strike, you go through a slightly different process from there.
So talking about the FD and Kalos and Town and City thing, I could be wrong when I say this, but I'm pretty sure that I started the Town and City is just another final destination. I was very vocal about it when the game first came out. It was interesting because I was a Diddy player, and I obviously Diddy excels on like FD type stages. In my opinion, Tweak feels a lot different than I do on a lot of that kind of thing, and a lot of other Diddy players do too. But when the game first came out, I was really concerned about there being FD Kalos in Town and City, and it's interesting because my opinions have changed since then. Because I went from going, Final Destination and Kalos, it's like the same neutral, right? So that's what's really important when looking at a platform layout, and that's how I was really, really hardwired for a lot of the game. But then I started looking at what does it actually mean in context with how neutral is played out, how is disadvantage played out, how is ledge trapping played out. There are so many different aspects to, if we're fighting at the center stage, is that what categorizes something? Because I'll be honest, like I don't really want to play Kazuya on FD. I will take Kazuya to Kalos every day of the week. I will ruin their lives and time them out every single time if they even think about playing my Diddy on Kalos. I welcome it. And that's such a huge departure of stages, right? And you go from Kalos is just another FD to, okay, well, there's some pretty important differences versus some really meta relevant characters, and it gives you different stats. But now we tie in Town and City. Town and City literally turns into Final Destination for a little while. It also turns into like Kalos and Northern for a little while. It also turns into a super unique, like reverse, like tri-platform layout for a while. And it's easy to say it's an FD variation, but it's, in my opinion, and this is just opinion, off the record, on the record, I don't care. It's its own thing. It's a morphing stage. It has its own properties. It has its own phases of neutral. It's definitely parameter-wise a lot different. It's a little longer than a normal stage. It definitely has stretcher incidents, people dying off the side, and you've got shorter blast zones, and some interns coded the right blast zone shorter than the left blast zone. It's its own beast, and I think towards the end of Ultimate now, I kind of view it as its own separate thing, because you can ask a Roy player, like, you want to go to Town and City, and they're like, yes. You want to go to FD? No. And it's like there's clearly some type of functional difference of how they perform, and I think a lot of people are still on the triple FD thing, and it's valid. I was there at some point too, and I get that, but that's one of the things I've seen with the 2 bans, why people want 3 bans, specifically so they can ban FD Kalos in Town. I don't think anybody's ever brought up why they care about 3 bans in any other situation. So that's just been interesting for me to observe. I don't feel like they're the same stages, and they definitely have way different impact on gameplay and matchups than FD. Like, you're banning, most people who are trying to ban FD are okay with Town and City. And I don't mean it generalized for everybody, but from my notions of what I've seen from a competitive player, they're usually not on the same ban roster.
And maybe that's where people being upset about FD, maybe there is a group of people that just kind of feel like, well, Town and City is FD2. Now for my stage strikes, I just have to forcibly strike FD and Town and City.
Yep.
Right. And that's, I can understand that point of view if you feel that way, but I do agree with Dakpo. I was also on the same train. I was like year 1 of the game. I was like, I got 2 bans, but I got 2 bans. I only can ban 2 out of 3 FDs. What the hell? You know what I mean? But I think Kalos, well, I personally am not a fan of Kalos. Like if I were to take one stage out, it'll definitely be Kalos, because I think this game is already inherently defensive, and I think Kalos gives you the most defensive options of all stages, and I think I would prefer if we don't go into like giving, because the characters and the game engine already promote timing out, right? Like if you're trying to win a lot of these matchups or what have you, right? It's already promoting hyper defense. So I think keeping stages that allow for even more of that, I think we want to stray away from in general. That's just my personal opinion. But I do think Town and City is the only legal morphing stage, and honestly, it's a pretty well done in terms of the intervals and stuff like that. There is some janky stuff with it, but it is truly a very unique stage, and I think it's not just FD2. Did you guys, Ramses or Tony, did you have anything on the FD family?
I can say the same.
try.
I can say the same thing I said before. I think there's just a lot of arbitrary differences, and so like we can say like, oh well, actually like town and FD are pretty significantly different, and in a certain context, it won't be significant. And just like we could say, oh well, actually like Unova and PS2 are pretty significantly similar, and maybe in some contexts it's not. And so like the system just sucks, dude. I don't know what else to say. I think in some circumstances the stages are very similar. I think in some circumstances they're not. And I think the fact that they are similar in some circumstances, and if they're not right now, they will be eventually as the meta progresses. I just think that sucks, and I think it's not. I don't think there's a good solution for that in the starter counterpick system. And so again, like I said before, I think within the confines of what the team set out to do, they've done an amazing job. And so like I'm not I'm not flaming that at all. And I agree with Charles. I think it can be frustrating. Like if you are someone, like if you're in a region with like a Kazuya, and you always have to ban Final Destination in town and city, like that just doesn't feel good. That's just the fact of the matter. It just does
But you
not
get
feel
what
good.
you want in that scenario. You do get what you want. You get at least two you get a platform, either one really big one or 2 to 3 other ones that you can not interact with Kazuya on, right?
True,
So like
true,
at the end of the day, like
yeah.
even if that's the thought process, you do get what you need.
Exactly, I agree. And so like at the end of the day, like it's just Smash, right? Like you sit down, you fucking play the game. Their stages are gonna impact the game.
Or you don't play in
around,
Kalos'
or you
case.
don't play. That's true. That's true. I am a Shulk main. I go into jump hard, and you cannot catch me.
Hey, see, look at another character. How many characters did we list already?
It's funny. Actually, once I played a money match against a R.O.B player. It was game 5, and I was up 1% on Kalos. And I had jump art, and it was in the final 3 seconds. And so I went to one side platform, activated jumped to the other side. My jump art put me so high, I took magnifying glass damage, and I lost the timeout by 0.5%. So Shulk, if Shulk is timing you out on that stage, you just wait for it to take magnifying glass damage. Like honestly, like what are you complaining about? No, but like Kalos is definitely a toxic stage. Anyway, I think it just, I understand that people think it feels bad. I think that's a valid argument. I think in terms of like effective results, practically, again, it's okay. Systematically, there's probably going to be a moment at which someone is going to abuse it and that's going to feel bad. Is that actually going to happen? Probably not. People don't really care about the rule set in Smash. Only when it gets changed, and then they care, and then they complain because it's something new, and then they go to a tournament where the rule set is used, and then they don't care again. Maybe the first time, and then they forget that it actually got changed in the first place. And so it's a feeling, and the feeling is valid. But let's be fair, it's also vapid.
So, the some things that we would want to see are right now. A lot of this is feelings and feels like, and at the end of the day, whenever it comes to feelings, I do think that top player opinions should be biased toward, because their intuition is typically backed by more anecdotal or experiential data than other opinions are going to be. However, I think that for us to come to the best consensus or best answers to these, including the question of, well, what happens if FD is banned and I have Town or Kalos, how do those affect? Is we would actually want to look at stage data, but we would also want to look at counter picking data and stage striking data, which is something we are closer to receiving than ever. There are multiple big events that actually do digitally track or digitally execute a stage striking, usually via touchpad or some such. However, I don't think that they're typically kept as survey data, and if they are, it is typically kept as internal survey data, which we did receive actual survey data from various majors that have kept it, but they were internal data that I don't think were quite free to share. So, something we would want to see is we would actually want to, and this is similar to something like smashdata.gg, where we would want to actually keep track of not just win-loss, but specifically the context informing those win-losses. Were they playing on Town and City because a different stage was banned? And if that stage wasn't banned and Town and City was, how would that change that? Unfortunately, because Smash is still small ball, even with the context of objective data like this, typically our sample sizes are intolerably small. So typically, if I remember correctly, the population you want to shoot for is 30 plus. But realistically speaking, you're not going to have Light versus Gluttony 30 times in Ultimate's lifespan, much less 30 times in order for us to establish a rule set for them to play most of their sets. Like at that point, you've successfully put the cart before the horse, and the game's over. Like, okay, what have you done? You've made a rule set that served no one, except for the people who are going to look at the game in posterity. That's it. So, these are things that we currently don't have, and we have the infrastructure to address. But I do see us coming closer to being able to answer questions like these, and are eventually coming closer to the true concept that it should be stage first, then character, because that's what the game says, and
Oh no.
that is more approachable for our average player. So, on a more serious note, though, even though, like I said, I don't like the suggested stage list, but just because I don't like the kind of ball that is rolling does not mean that I don't appreciate Dakpo and company for pushing that ball forward, for helping us as a community move forward with the infrastructure and communication that we need. So I can't overstate how challenging it can be to have a group together along different time zones. Like even just us having this podcast among time zones, we have difficulties all the time. And each person, each slot that you have to add to 4 people makes it exponentially difficult to make happen. And so it's not as simple as just being 5 times difficult to have 20 people to have a discussion or to coordinate or communicate. It's exponentially more difficult than 5 times. It is very challenging, and I would go so far as to say that prior to their efforts, it was impossible, because it is something that the TOs independently, and keep in mind, these are the people with some of the best organizational experience and skills, or most practiced organizational skills in the community. So this is not like we're taking just average people. These are the people who have the most anecdotal experience of performing these tasks, and they were not able to make it happen. However, Dakpo did push forward with that, as did Captain L, and they worked together to give the TOs the tools they needed to bridge that gap and get this done. So, as anyone will tell you, don't worry about the quality of your project that you're getting done. Getting the job done and getting the project done, and then iterating on that project is the step toward it. Perfection is the enemy of the good, and we are working forward, progressing forward toward getting our ultimate end goal, which is to have a stage list that maybe a larger portion of the community is favorable toward, and that more importantly, all or most of the community will participate in, so that we can come closer to actually playing the same game and competing in the same game, instead of I'm playing in a European tournament, or I'm playing in a North American tournament, or I'm playing in a Japanese tournament, where the rules are completely different. So we've come a long way from item standard play. And
Shout out
I
to
do
CPU, bro.
That. Yes, sir.
The R.O.B.
Oh, the Evo champ.
The
Yes,
Evo
sir.
champ, exactly.
So I don't
bro.
think some people realize how far we've come, how much progress there's been made, but this is a significant step forward. This is a third continent coming under a relatively united rule set, and so hopefully our friends across the other pond will also unite, and then once we have it down to 3 parties, we can start working together to unite from those 3
to get the global.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Global rule set incoming, hopefully. That sounds like the dream. All right, but
that is a dream.
I know
Pipe
it
dream.
is very late for Ramses, so we're going to close this one out. A lot of content for you guys. Obviously, stage list.
Thank you, Token European.
A ton of information, and again, thank you, Dakpo, and the team out there, along with Captain El Rey and many others that really came together with this rule set. If you guys do want to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you did enjoy the content, let us know in the comments below what you think your ideal rule set is, or some of the topics or opinions on rule sets. I would love to see it in the comments below. And of course, until next time, class dismissed.